Hi, everyone. So we're going to talk about cellular respiration and fermentation today. Let me just start this in present mode. Okay, so cellular respiration and fermentation are ways that cells can get energy out of the food that they take in. So, we eat food, but that food has to go somewhere. And what it does is it gets broken down by our digestive system into very tiny little molecules that can diffuse into our cells. And then our cells bring it to the little mitochondria, and then they can break it down to make ATP. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So our key concept questions, what is cellular respiration? What are the two main types of fermentation? And we're going to compare photosynthesis with cellular respiration because they're very closely linked types of processes. Okay, the energy needs of life, and you're going to be filling your notes in as we go through this. So we know that animals are energy consumers. We require energy to do all the things that we do in life. What do we need energy for? Well, we need energy for synthesis, to make things in our bodies, in our cells. We need cells, or we need energy for reproduction. To make the gametes, the sperm and the egg cells, we need energy for that part. We need energy for active transport of those molecules across the cell membrane. And we need energy for movement, obviously. If you think of a cheetah and how fast they can run, they require a lot of energy for their activities. We also need energy for temperature control. All mammals are, they're called endothermic, which means we can maintain a constant body temperature, but it requires a lot of energy to do that. So that's something that we need energy for. Where do we get energy? It's stored in organic molecules in the chemical bonds of those organic molecules. And the molecules that we're talking about, bringing back our review, are the carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. And animals are going to have to eat these organic molecules. That's what we call food. And we measure the amount of energy in our food using the term calorie. So you see that on nutrition labels. Well, this is what a calorie is by definition. It's the amount of energy needed to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water 1 degree Celsius. So they have these special labs set up to test all of the food that we consume to find out how many calories they are. Okay, and then we have to digest our food to get the fuel for energy, our ATP. And we need some raw materials for building more molecules. We have to break down these molecules to make new ones. We need to be able to make other carbohydrates, other fats, proteins, and nucleic acids because our body is using them all and we need to make more. So what is energy in biology? It's ATP, and that stands for adenosine triphosphate. So harvesting the energy stored in food is going to be occurring through a process called cellular respiration. And cellular respiration is when we break down food to produce ATP. And it occurs inside the mitochondria. And just so you know that this is occurring in both plant cells and animal cells. It's going to require the presence of oxygen. Oh, and then down at the bottom, you can see our formula. We've got it in word format and in the symbols, and you are going to be required to know both. So glucose plus oxygen, that's what's required to go into those mitochondria. And what gets produced is carbon dioxide, water, and energy. And then if you look underneath that, those are the symbols for our chemical reaction here. So C6H12O6, that's glucose, plus 6 molecules of oxygen, so 6O2. It's going to produce 6 molecules of carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of water plus ATP. And then there is other energy released as heat. That's waste energy as well. And that's how come we can maintain a body temperature that we do, because some of that waste energy is our body heat. Okay, so what do we need to make this energy? So our furnace, which is the mitochondria, We need some fuel, which is food, and something like glucose. And then there's helper molecules. We're going to need oxygen to help out. And if oxygen is present, it's called aerobic. Okay, that's like the term that means oxygen is available or oxygen is present. It's aerobic. And then we always need enzymes. For any chemical reaction that's occurring in our cells, we're going to need some enzymes to help out. So here's our mitochondria. Food and oxygen are going in. ATP is coming out. That's the whole purpose for cellular respiration, is to create energy for our cells. So cellular respiration is essentially burning fuel to make energy. And one really good analogy is like combustion, where you're burning wood, let's say, to get energy out of it. You're getting heat energy and there's light energy coming out of it. So combustion is definitely similar to cellular respiration in that the reactants and the products are very close to each other. So you're making heat energy by burning fuels, but it all occurs in one step. Cellular respiration is a little different because it's going to make ATP energy by burning these fuels, but in lots of small steps. So the energy is released slowly, and it's a much more efficient process for our cells. So here you can see our food going in with the oxygen available, and we're going to be producing ATP, carbon dioxide, and water as the waste products. So using ATP to do work, we can't store ATP. It has to be used pretty much right away by the cell. And it's because it's kind of an unstable molecule, so it needs to be used very quickly. It is only used in the cell that produces it. So cells can't share ATP with each other. They have to use their own. And it's only short-term energy storage. That's why we have carbohydrates and fats. Those are really good for long-term energy storage. And remember, the energy in the carbohydrates and the fats can be found in the chemical bonds within those molecules. So here's our ATP. Once it gets used in the cell, the energy is stored in that bond. Remember, ATP has it's a new type of nucleic acid, and it's got 3 phosphate groups on it. As your cell breaks off the end phosphate group, it releases energy. So then it becomes ADP plus a phosphate kind of extra. And then it can be recycled by the cell to be made into ATP again. And a cool little fact here, a working muscle recycles over 10 million ATPs per second. So it can recycle them very quickly in the process of, in the mitochondria. So our energy budget in our body, we need to eat food for ATP. So we need energy, just resting energy. If you're just sitting there watching this video, you're using energy. Any type of activity is going to require energy. Our temperature control is going to require energy. We might need ATP for synthesis processes, for growing and reproduction. Like I said, making egg cells and sperm cells requires energy, so the body's going to need that to make those. And then storage too. Glycogen is the stored form of glucose for animals, and then fat is a good stored energy source. Okay, so now the question is, what if oxygen isn't available? How do we get energy out of our food then? So there's something called anaerobic respiration. That AN at the beginning means not aerobic. So that means oxygen is not available. There's a couple different ways that different cells can extract energy out of the food that's available if there's no oxygen there. One of them is alcohol fermentation. And what happens, this can occur in yeast cells, for example. And what they can do is they can take the glucose and break it down without oxygen being available, and they can produce ATP, carbon dioxide, and alcohol as a waste product. But it can't make as much ATP as it could if oxygen is available. So that's kind of the downside of anaerobic respiration. They can still get energy, but just not quite as much. So the processes that you can find this in like everyday life is in making beer, wine, bread. And then there's lactic acid fermentation, and we do this in our cells. And bacteria can do this as well. like in yogurt and stuff. So we can take glucose in our cells, and if we're running low on oxygen in our cells can still burn glucose, but we won't be able to make quite as much ATP. And one of the waste products this time is called lactic acid. And that's kind of what creates the burn in your muscle as it starts to kind of be expressed in your cells. That's kind of what that burning sensation is the lactic acid. Like I said, making yogurt, the bacteria use lactic acid fermentation. Animals will feel muscle fatigue when they start building up lactic acid. Like I said, though, it only makes a small amount of ATP, and it's not as much as if there was a lot of oxygen available. Okay, so something to know is that the reactants in photosynthesis are the same as the products of cellular respiration. It's going to be important for you to know how these two reactions are related to each other, and this is how. Okay, so you're going to have to know both processes. So you can see the reactants for photosynthesis are carbon dioxide and water. And then it says those are the reactants for photosynthesis. They're the same as the products of cellular respiration. The products of cellular respiration you can see here in the middle are CO2 and H2O, the same as the reactants for photosynthesis. And then the products of photosynthesis are actually also the same as the reactants for cellular respiration. Okay. So they're very closely related, and this is how we can cycle carbon dioxide and oxygen through the planet is through these two processes. Okay, so on the next chart, you're going to be comparing photosynthesis and cellular respiration. And so as I go through these, make sure you fill in your table. So photosynthesis, we're going to start there. The function of photosynthesis is to produce food. Plants do this because they have chloroplasts in them, and they're going to be making food like glucose for themselves. So like I just said, it's located in the chloroplast inside of a plant cell. And the reactants that are required are going to be carbon dioxide and water. Plants need to take these two in addition to sunlight, in order for this process to occur. And the products is what gets made or produced. And that's going to be the C6H12O6, that's glucose, and oxygen is produced. And here's the full equation that you're going to want to memorize and know really, really well. And then we'll go on to cellular respiration. Its function is to make energy in the form of ATP. And it occurs inside the mitochondria. Now, here's an important point. Photosynthesis only occurs in plants because they have chloroplasts. Cellular respiration occurs in all eukaryotic cells because they all have mitochondria. So plants can do both of these processes. Animals can only do cellular respiration. So the reactants for cellular respiration is C6H12O6 and oxygen, O2. And then the products are going to be CO2 plus H2O and ATP. And then here's your full formula for this process.